Welcome to WT360's June Ag Update.
Hey, good morning. This is WTI Chief Meteorologist Richard Woolley with a little quick update here in the Corn Belt weather forecast for the month of June. Let's take a look back at what's happened so far this spring. Back in April, we were really wet throughout much of the Midwest, down into the southern plains. A little bit of dryness starting to show up here in the northern plains, but all in all, pretty good conditions. Matter of fact, almost too wet to get a lot of planting in, and that did affect some planting earlier this year. Let's move ahead and take a look at what's going on here in May so far. Here in May, we noticed that precipitation has really started to taper off across most of the middle of the country. We're also seeing kind of this dry trend starting to show up across here in the upper Midwest. That's going to cause some issues here as we start to dry out and get into some summer heat here recently. We also see a lot of expansion of the dryness in the northern plains here. That's going to be a story we're going to look at for the rest of the summer here, we think. Also notice precipitation has continued to maintain itself across the eastern parts of the Corn Belt, but really the western Corn Belt and parts of the central Corn Belt are a little bit of a concern right now. It's getting dry and it's starting to get hot. Let's take a look at the first few days of May here. We can see, first few days of June. And we can say here in June there really hasn't been any precipitation at all out here of significance. Pretty much all of the plains, the Midwest, Corn Belt been dry for the last 8 to 9, 10 days. We're getting some rain down south along the Gulf Coast. We're also getting it in Florida. Florida had been dry through the month of May, but now the rains have turned on in Florida. They've had about a foot of rain down there in the last few days, so pretty much the dryness that we were worried about in South Florida is pretty much over at this point. And we're starting to see the typical tropical moistures coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico in the early summer, which is what we normally see. However, we are seeing quite a bit of dryness across the Midwest here, and that definitely is causing some problems. We're also noticing that with that dryness, we're starting to see soil moistures starting to dry out. We're starting to see drier soils throughout most of the Corn Belt. And we can also see that in the next image here as we look at the overall soil moisture anomaly for June 6th. We notice we definitely have a bit of a dryness area starting to show up here in southeast Iowa, northern Missouri. We also have all this dryness showing up in the northern plains out there in the Dakotas. We're still pretty moist up across Wisconsin, Michigan, and also this little belt from Kansas into southern Missouri. And you can see some of the moisture that's showing up on the Gulf Coast here. This recent dryness in Florida, that's all going to disappear in about another day or two once the precipitation catches up and soil moistures pick up down there. So that's all going to disappear. But we are watching this. If you know, look at all the Corn Belt area here that's basically sitting in about normal to even slightly drier than normal conditions. And we think that's actually going to expand as we go through the summer, especially out here on the western side. Back east here, a little wetter, a little better conditions, but out west, definitely a little drier. Let's take a look at the overall projection. We're going to go out here all the way through the end of August. Kind of meteorological summer. June, July, August is what we consider to be summer. And this is precipitation. This is what our expectations are for the precipitation forecast for the summer. We have generally drier, as I was talking about, basically from the central and western Corn Belt westward. Eastern Corn Belt looks a little wetter, a little better conditions. And also notice the dryness out here in the plains. Quite a bit drier all throughout the plains. And with dryness usually comes what in the summertime? Heat. We're looking at a fairly warm summer throughout the plains here. And when you get that dry soils and the midsummer sunshine, you're going to get a lot of hotter weather. So we're just looking at a good deal of heat pretty much across a good part of the Midwest. Definitely cooler to the south where the rainfall and increased soil moistures are going to keep temperatures down in the summertime. But overall, temperatures are quite warm out here in the plains and look to stay that way through most of the summer. Further east you go, it's a bit more sporadic as you get into eastern Corn Belt, again because we talked about that extra rainfall in the east. But out here where it's expected to remain somewhat drier, we're looking at overall conditions to be fairly warm and dry summer. That also should probably lead to some upward pressure on corn prices, as basically we're going to look at situation here earlier this spring where the wetness here in the eastern part of the Corn Belt prevented planting. We possibly see a reduction in number of acres that were planted this year. And now with this dryness starting to show up out here, we may start to see some problems with yield as we go later in the summer. If you recall, last summer we had just a similar hot summer to this, except we got all this beneficial rain basically in this big belt right in here. That was very helpful to the overall corn crop. We don't expect to see that as much this year.
Thank you for watching the June Ag Update. If you have any questions, please contact Rich or Pam at the email addresses above. They'll be happy to help.